The studio lights buzzed overhead, but the tension in the CNBC green room was louder. Karoline Leavitt sat at the edge of her chair, her fingers loosely gripping a folded receipt. It was faded at the edges, creased from being opened and refolded a dozen times. A gallon of milk, $6.49. Eggs, $5.89. Bread, $4.79. She didn't need the numbers to remind her, she had memorized every line. Across the hallway, the conversation was already heating up. Lisa D. Cook, a Federal Reserve governor and one of the most frequently cited voices on the Biden economy, was wrapping up her segment. With a rehearsed smile, she declared to the cameras, "The American economy is the strongest it's been in a generation. Inflation is under control, wages are up. People are thriving." Karoline nearly laughed out loud. A stage assistant waved her in. It was her turn. The host, eyes dancing with anticipation, greeted her with a thin grin. "And now we're joined by Karoline Leavitt, Republican strategist and commentator. Karoline, you just heard Ms. Cook. Do you agree with her optimistic assessment?" Karoline leaned forward, calmly placing the crumpled grocery receipt on the desk between them. "With all due respect to Ms. Cook," she began, voice even and sharp, "this is what Americans are living through. This right here." She tapped the paper twice. "This is the Biden economy in real terms. Not graphs. Not government charts. But receipts." The audience in the control room froze. Even the host blinked, unsure whether to interrupt. Karoline continued, lifting the receipt and unfolding it for the camera. "A single mom in Ohio sent me this. She works 2 jobs. She's not thriving. She's praying her gas tank and pantry last until Friday. You want to talk about strong? Strong is what it takes to survive this mess." She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her voice cut through the room with precision. In a split-screen reaction shot, Cook, still seated offstage, shifted in her chair. Her smile was gone. Karoline turned back to the host. "I'm not here to parrot talking points. I'm here to speak for the people who are tired of being told they're doing just fine while they're drowning in bills." The host cleared his throat. "But the data." Karoline cut in, sharp but calm. "Data doesn't shop at Walmart. Data doesn't choose between medicine and rent." And just like that, the studio went silent. Karoline stepped off the set with the receipt still in her hand, her face unreadable but calm. The studio buzzed around her, assistants whispering, producers shuffling through papers, someone yelling for a fact-check segment on aisle prices. But Karoline didn't stop. She didn't need validation. The audience's silence during her segment had said enough. Lisa Cook was already standing near the hallway, arms crossed, visibly perturbed. "You oversimplified a complex system," she said before Karoline even made eye contact. "There's context to inflation. The Fed has tools. You know that." Karoline didn't flinch. "You sat there and told America the economy is strong. And I sat there and told the truth. Context doesn't feed families, Dr. Cook. Receipts do." A crowd of interns and staffers paused to listen. Phones were out. It was no longer just a hallway, it was a battlefield. Lisa shook her head, frustrated. "This kind of rhetoric is dangerous. You're undermining trust in the institutions." Karoline raised an eyebrow. "No. What's dangerous is pretending everything's fine when it's not. What's dangerous is letting working-class Americans believe they're crazy for struggling while elites tell them they should be grateful." Cook took a step closer, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "You're not an economist. You're a provocateur." Karoline folded the receipt again, deliberately, and slipped it into her blazer pocket. "I'm not trying to be an economist. I'm trying to be a mirror. If that reflection makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not me you should be angry at." The hallway grew still. One of the younger production assistants whispered, "She's not wrong," and the murmurs began. Karoline walked away, heels clicking, not looking back. What she didn't see, but the nation would. Hours later, was that clip of their confrontation, caught on a backstage camera and leaked within minutes. It hit Twitter like wildfire. Millions watched Lisa Cook, a face of polished confidence and central bank authority, get verbally cornered by a young woman with a grocery bill. And Karoline? She wasn't watching the numbers. She was boarding a flight to Des Moines for her next town hall. She wasn't done talking, not even close. The town hall in Des Moines wasn't supposed to be packed. Just another community center, folding chairs, a few camera phones. But by the time Karoline stepped onto the stage, the firestorm from D.C. had already arrived before her. Dozens had turned into hundreds. The clip of her showdown with Lisa Cook had flooded every platform. On X, someone captioned it, "She brought facts. Cook brought spin." Conservative voices praised her. Liberal pundits called her reckless. But for the people sitting in that room, farmers, mothers, young workers, it wasn't about politics. It was about someone finally saying what they felt. Karoline stood at the podium, no teleprompter, no advisors behind her. Just her, a mic, and that crumpled grocery receipt. "I didn't fly here to go viral," she began, her voice clear. "I came here to ask a question no one in Washington seems brave enough to answer. Why does the most powerful economy in the world make its own citizens feel powerless in the checkout aisle?" The room was dead silent. "I'm not an economist. I'm not a banker. But I know when a gallon of milk jumps 50 cents in 2 weeks, that's not transitory. That's theft, from your wallets. From your time, from your dignity." A man in the back muttered, "Amen." Karoline held up the receipt again, waving it like a banner. "They told me this was fear-mongering. That I was undermining faith in the system. But let me ask you, when was the last time the system had faith in you?" A woman with 2 kids near the front wiped tears from her eyes. "I sat across from a woman who's been praised by the White House, awarded by the Ivy League, and trusted to guide the fate of the American dollar. And you know what she told me? That the economy's strong." Karoline paused. "Well, if this," she held up the receipt again, "is strength, then maybe weakness would be more affordable." The room erupted. Cheers. Laughter. Applause. Phones raised in unison. She didn't stop there. "I don't care about headlines. I care about home fronts. I care that you're being asked to smile while drowning. I care that Washington is more interested in controlling the narrative than fixing the nightmare." The local news crew, initially sent just for coverage, had already begun live streaming. And somewhere in a corner office in D.C., Lisa Cook watched the broadcast, her phone buzzing relentlessly. The backlash she feared was now a full-blown movement, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't just on the stage. She had become the stage. Back in Washington, they tried to brush it off. "Another political stunt," a CNN analyst sneered. "A TikTok moment," scoffed a columnist from the Washington Post. But they were wrong, and Karoline knew it the second she stepped off that stage and saw the swarm of reporters waiting outside. One of them, a young guy from a progressive outlet, shoved a mic in her face. "Ms. Leavitt, aren't you afraid that undermining the Federal Reserve's credibility could destabilize markets?" She didn't blink. "Markets are already destabilized, for the average American. You just don't report on that because it doesn't happen on Wall Street." That clip went just as viral as the speech. By the end of the day, Karoline had turned what the media hoped would be a 24-hour flash into a wildfire. Lisa D. Cook, meanwhile, was being shuffled between Zoom calls with Treasury officials and White House aides. "Do we respond?" someone asked nervously. Cook stared at the screen. She had underestimated Karoline. She had thought she could shut her down with the usual language: GDP up, unemployment down, inflation moderating. But Karoline hadn't played the numbers game. She had made it personal. Emotional. Real. And that's what scared them. Across the country, other voices were rising. Local news began airing segments titled "The Cost of Living Crisis," beyond the data. At a truck stop in Indiana, a man taped Karoline's quote, "Maybe weakness would be more affordable," to the door. She had done what politicians feared most. She made people feel like they weren't crazy. The establishment scrambled. Former Fed officials were booked on cable shows. Economists were rolled out to explain why technically, things were better than they seemed. But no one cared about technically. That night, Karoline went live on her own platform. No makeup team, no script. Just her and the camera. "They tried to make me sound radical," she said. "But wanting affordable groceries isn't radical. Being able to fill your gas tank without doing mental math isn't extremist. That's America." The comments flooded in. Single moms, veterans, college students, retirees. People who didn't even agree with her politically, but felt, for once, someone was speaking to them, not at them. By midnight, she was trending again. And somewhere deep in the halls of the Fed, Lisa Cook leaned back in her chair and realized. Karoline wasn't just challenging her economics. She was rewriting the narrative. The next morning, Karoline stepped out of her D.C. apartment with a coffee in one hand and a folder in the other, packed with real stories from real Americans. She wasn't done. She had ignited something, and she knew it. On the steps of the Capitol, cameras were already rolling. Not the mainstream networks, of course. They were still trying to pretend she didn't matter. But the new media, the independent outlets, the podcasts, the creators with millions of subscribers, they were all there. And Karoline? She wasn't waiting for permission. "Yesterday, they told you the economy is strong," she began, voice steady, eyes locked on the lens. "But I just got off the phone with a father in Georgia who's working 3 jobs and still skipping meals so his kids can eat. Is that strength?" The silence from the institutions was louder than any rebuttal. Inside the Federal Reserve Building, Lisa Cook stared at the news ticker as it scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Leavitt slams Fed again, cites working families being left behind." She picked up the phone. "Get me our comms team. Now." But messaging couldn't fix this. Karoline wasn't throwing talking points. She was lighting matchsticks. By noon, her Capitol speech had racked up over 10 million views. Commentators on the left scrambled to frame it as populist theatrics, while moderates whispered to each other in committee halls, "We're going to have to respond to this." Karoline wasn't surprised. She had seen it before, the pattern of dismissal followed by panic. The establishment had spent decades mastering the art of deflection. But this time, she wasn't letting go. Later that afternoon, she held up a receipt on the House floor. $8.39 for a gallon of milk in New York. This is what your policies look like. You may not shop in those stores, but millions of Americans do. And you know what they feel every time they swipe that card? She paused. Abandoned. The chamber was still. Even some Democrats shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lisa Cook, watching from her office, turned the screen off. She had made the mistake of treating Karoline like another partisan voice. But Karoline hadn't spoken like a politician. She had spoken like someone who'd been there. And that's why they couldn't shake her. By the time Karoline stepped into the morning news cycle, the backlash had already begun. CNN was calling her speech reckless populism. MSNBC had a panel of economists, none of whom had bought their own groceries in years, accusing her of emotional manipulation. Lisa Cook herself had issued a press release: "Inflation is under control. Public fearmongering does not reflect economic realities." But Karoline didn't flinch. She turned on her mic on a live stream that afternoon and stared directly into the lens. "If speaking for the people you've ignored is fearmongering, then maybe you've been living in fear of the truth." She didn't wait for invitations. She made airtime. And people were tuning in, not because she had a blue check mark or a legacy surname, but because she was saying what they felt and living what they lived. Then it hit a boiling point. A small business owner from Wisconsin stitched her video on TikTok. He showed his empty shelves, rising electric bills, and a tax notice he couldn't afford. She's the only one who said what we've all been yelling into the void. Within hours, thousands of videos poured in: farmers, truckers, single moms, teachers. All of them holding up bills. Gas receipts, rent hikes, milk jugs. All of them tagging, #Karoline was right. It wasn't a moment. It was a movement. Lisa Cook, now pressured by the press, was booked for a Sunday show interview. She wore her calmest tone, her firmest numbers. But Karoline had already published a direct reply the night before. She wasn't reacting, she was leading. Standing in front of a backdrop of an average American town, not a marble hall, she said. They'll give you statistics. I'm giving you stories. They'll print charts. I'll show you children skipping meals. If that's a contest, let the people decide. She dropped her phone and walked straight into a grocery store. Unscripted, unprotected. Straight to the checkout line. 2 teenage cashiers looked up, stunned. One whispered, "You're her." Karoline smiled, pulled out a loaf of bread, a gallon of milk, and diapers. The total, $24.89. Then she looked straight into the camera. This is your America under their version of strength. And with that, she paid in cash, held the receipt high, and left it at the store bulletin board with a note: "Tell me again the economy's strong." Karoline's act didn't just go viral, it hit a nerve buried beneath layers of economic gaslighting. By Monday morning, Lisa Cook's scheduled press event was postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. But it wasn't unforeseen. It was the pressure of reality crashing down. The Federal Reserve's public inbox had been flooded with thousands of emails, most with the subject line, "Strong for who?" Meanwhile, Karoline had already moved on. She walked into a church basement in Pennsylvania. No press, no podium, just a folding table, a pot of burnt coffee, and about 30 locals seated on metal chairs. The kind of place national figures never went. But she wasn't there for photo ops. She was there to listen. A single mother with 2 kids stood up and said, "They keep telling us the numbers look great. My bank account says otherwise." A retired welder added, "I worked 40 years and now I'm back doing odd jobs so I can afford heating oil." Karoline didn't say much at first. She took notes. Nodded. Let the silence breathe. That was her power, not just in what she said, but in what she heard. Then she spoke, low and clear. "They've been telling you that struggle is your fault. That if you can't make ends meet, you must have done something wrong. I'm here to say, they're wrong. You were lied to. And I won't let them do it in silence." A man from the back shouted, "So what now?" Karoline took a breath. Then answered. "We show up where they least expect us. We speak where they hope we'll be quiet. We use our stories, not just to expose the lie, but to remind this country of the truth." And she did exactly that the next morning on national television. Booked last minute on Morning America, Karoline sat across from a panel of 3 hostile hosts. One held up a chart showing unemployment dropping. Karoline smiled tightly. "That's cute. Now let me show you the line at the food pantry behind my hotel last night." They shifted in their chairs. You think because the stock market rebounds, the pain disappears. But the real economy doesn't trade on Wall Street. It lives at the kitchen table. And right now, that table's empty. The segment went viral before it was over. Clips were cut, hashtags flooded every platform, #KitchenTableEconomy and #ReceiptsNotReports. Suddenly, every politician was scrambling to pretend they'd always cared about working people. But it was too late. Karoline had already become the face of a reckoning. Not polished. Not poll-tested. Just real. And for millions of Americans? That was more than enough. The next time Karoline appeared in public, it wasn't behind a podium or a TV camera. It was at a checkout line in a suburban grocery store in Missouri. She walked in without staff, without makeup, without pretense, just a denim jacket and a stack of receipts in her hand. A local woman, recognizing her, whispered, "What are you doing here?" Karoline held up a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. "Just trying to see what Lisa Cook thinks is affordable." The cashier smiled. The man behind her muttered, "About time someone came to where we actually live." Moments later, someone pulled out their phone and live-streamed the scene. Karoline placed her items on the counter, then turned to the camera and spoke softly. "This is the real economic report. Not the charts they show on the news. Not the speeches filled with numbers no one understands. This is it. Milk, bread, eggs. $19.47. She looked straight into the lens. And some people are trying to survive on $50 a week. That 15-second clip was viewed 82 million times in 24 hours. And with it came something no one expected: silence from the Fed. Lisa Cook didn't respond. No tweets. No press statements. Just quiet. Because deep down, even she knew, there was no argument left. But Karoline wasn't done. She walked outside, where a small crowd had gathered. A young man asked, "What do you say to people who think you're just making noise?" She looked him dead in the eyes. "I'd rather be noise than part of a machine that pretends silence equals progress." A woman next to him added, "They say the economy's strong, Karoline. But I can't sleep at night." Karoline didn't blink. Strength isn't in the numbers. It's in whether a mom can feed her kids without skipping dinner herself. It's in whether a retired veteran can buy insulin without selling his truck. And it's in whether someone like you has the courage to ask questions out loud. That's the economy I'm fighting for. The applause wasn't loud, but it was real. And it echoed far beyond that parking lot. By sundown, dozens of local TV stations across the country were running specials titled, "The Grocery Truth Tour." They didn't call it that. The people did. The day after the Grocery Truth Tour exploded across social media, Karoline stood on the marble steps of the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. No podium, no banners, just her, a handheld mic, and a bag of groceries beside her boots. A security guard approached her, gently but firmly. "Ma'am, you need a permit to be here." Karoline looked him in the eyes. "Then write me a ticket, for speaking the truth." The guard backed away. Within minutes, a crowd began to form. Workers on their lunch break, moms with strollers, retirees with quiet, tired faces. Karoline held up a receipt, creased and faded. "This is from a teacher in Tulsa. She messaged me this morning. Karoline," she wrote, "I'm skipping meals so my students don't go without snacks. Is this what a strong economy means?" She folded the paper slowly. "Lisa Cook says everything's stable. Then why are people rationing baby formula and cutting their own insulin doses?" There was no anger in her voice, just unrelenting clarity. She wasn't performing. She was standing. And the weight of that stance carried into every camera lens aimed at her. Across cable news, anchors hesitated. The usual spin didn't land right. Clip after clip showed her standing there, calm, composed, surrounded by citizens nodding quietly. The movement had evolved. It was no longer Karoline speaking for the people. It was the people speaking through Karoline. A local reporter stepped up, mic in hand. "Ms. Leavitt, do you believe Lisa Cook should resign?" Karoline didn't flinch. "I believe anyone who looks Americans in the eye and tells them their struggle doesn't exist, should find another job. That's not economics. That's gaslighting." Cheers erupted. From the balcony above, a few Fed staffers watched silently. One man in a suit turned and walked away. Karoline looked back at the crowd, her voice steady. This isn't about left or right anymore. It's about right and wrong. And no amount of economic jargon can hide the pain on every checkout line. That line became a headline. Right versus wrong, Leavitt's Fed showdown sparks national reckoning. The White House didn't issue a statement, but the silence said enough. Lisa Cook's name was suddenly absent from the next public Fed briefing. Her aides said she was traveling. But everyone knew she was retreating. And Karoline? She wasn't done. 3 days later, Karoline stood before a room packed with cameras, not at the Federal Reserve, not in Congress, but at a community food pantry in Cleveland. Behind her, crates of canned goods were being stacked by local volunteers. In front of her, Americans who had lived the pain Lisa D. Cook dismissed as temporary fluctuation. She picked up a family-size box of cereal. This used to be $3.49, Karoline said, holding it high. Now, $7.25. And that's if you're lucky enough to find it. A grandmother in the front row wiped her eyes. Karoline didn't miss it. Lisa Cook says the numbers are improving. But I'm looking at the real numbers. At this pantry last year, they served 400 families per month. Today? 1,200, that's not growth, that's desperation. She turned to the cameras. I want every bureaucrat in D.C., every economist in their ivory tower, to hear this loud and clear: you don't get to define strength while people are skipping meals to keep the lights on. The video went viral before she even left the stage. By nightfall, the White House communications team issued a lukewarm response: we appreciate all perspectives. But the damage was done. Karoline had shifted the frame. It wasn't just a political argument, it was a moral one. And millions agreed. CNN called it a populist lightning bolt. Fox News ran the headline, "Leavitt goes for the Fed's jugular." But the quote that stuck came from a retired truck driver interviewed outside the pantry. He said, "I don't care if she's red or blue. She's the first person I've seen who sounds like she's listening." Lisa Cook was scheduled to appear at a televised economic summit 2 days later. She canceled. No explanation. Karoline? She showed up, uninvited, and stood on the sidewalk outside the venue with a bullhorn. Not screaming. Not chanting. Just reading real messages from real people. Groceries. Gas bills. Eviction notices. Childcare receipts. As the cameras rolled and the wind picked up, she held her ground. This isn't politics anymore, she said. This is survival. And someone needs to speak the words no one else in power will say: enough. The final clip of that day went global: Karoline, standing alone in the cold, one hand on the flag pinned to her coat, eyes unblinking as the wind tore through her notes. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She just stood, and the country watched. They can spin charts, tweak language, and pretend the pain isn't real. But Karoline didn't read from a script. She held up the truth, and let the people speak. While elites like Lisa Cook dismiss inflation as manageable, Karoline showed what it actually costs: dignity, security, and hope. In the end, this wasn't about policies. It was about courage. And she had plenty.